Okay, are we ready? Calling the March 26th regular meeting of the Planning Commission to order, and we will get started with the flag salute.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are there any agenda changes?
No, there are not.
Thank you. We'll get started with general public comments. This is an opportunity for the public to comment on any land use item of interest to the public that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the commission and is not posted on the consent or regular agenda. California law prohibits the commission from taking action on any matter which is not posted on the agenda unless it is determined to be an emergency by the commission. We allow 5 minutes per person and 15 minutes per topic. If there's any member of the public who would like to comment, you could call in now, and we'll allow 5 minutes or so.
Keep in mind that the 20-second delay is happening now, so their time to call in hasn't started as far as the video goes.
Well, and you want to say, like, we'll end at, if we don't hear from anybody by 9:17, we'll end public comment. That way, they've got a time that they hear as opposed to when they...
Thank you. So you should see the number on your screen now, and if we don't hear any calls by 9:18, we will move on to the next item.
Let's see if I can get this to work. Thank you for calling in your public comment to the Planning Commission. You will be giving a live comment, so keep in mind that there is a delay in the video. You will have 5 minutes to give your comment. If you will receive a warning when you are 30 seconds remaining, and when your time is over, this call will end. Please be sure to turn off the volume of the meeting broadcast before you speak. If you would like to give your name, please do so and then begin your comment. Hello, you can begin.
Yes, hi, this is Vicki Reinke, and I'm calling regarding not to comment on the item, but to comment in general about the agenda item 2, the project for cannabis retail ordinance. The agenda item is Calaveras County is proposing to adopt an ordinance regulating the retail sale of cannabis. The proposed ordinance would permit the sale of adult use and medical cannabis in the professional office CP zone. Upon approval of an administrative use permit, a negative declaration has been prepared. This item should be postponed. It should be postponed until after the COVID-19 pandemic is over. County business should be limited to essential items only. And I understand that the county has a process to place for those citizens that have access to the internet to participate. But as we all know that a lot of people don't have access to the internet. And it appears that this is an action item, which makes it more important that the public have proper access to listening and making comments. So I'd please consider postponing the hearing for a later date, or at least don't make a final approval today, because it isn't right for the public, and this is a very, very important item on the agenda. Thank you.
Are there any additional public comments? We'll wait another 2 minutes, and then we will move on to the next item. We know this is awkward for everybody, but we are going to go ahead and move on to the consent agenda. Is there any commissioner or member of the public who would like to pull an item from the consent agenda, which consists only of the minutes? I guess I need to give it a minute, 20 seconds.
Then give them a minute.
Yeah. Seeing none, are we ready for a motion on the minutes?
For some reason, I didn't get the minutes.
Neither did I.
I didn't get anything.
I did not get the message either. This is Jim.
I was just going to say, I didn't get a packet at all. I just printed the materials.
Yeah, I was unable to print it, so.
I didn't get a packet either.
Neither did I.
That's unfortunate. We sent it out last week, so I don't know if there are delays in the postal service or in our mail room because of the emergency. So why don't we just carry this over to the next meeting?
Do we need a vote on that, or can I just administratively move it?
Probably, could we move it to the next meeting? Probably a good idea just to move this to the next meeting.
Is there a motion to
I
move
make a
this to?
motion for continuance on the approval of the minutes.
We have a motion to continue the consent agenda items consisting of minutes to our next meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Laddish votes aye.
Thank you. I thought I was probably the only one. I had no idea nobody got them. So let's get started with our regular agenda item, 2019-077, zoning amendment for Richard Ducharme. Ducharme. And Madeline, will you lead us?
I will. Good morning. Madeline Flandreau, Planner 2. I'm going to present project number 2019-077, zoning amendment for Richard Ducharme. The applicant is requesting approval of a zoning amendment from rural residential with a 20-acre minimum to residential agriculture with a 20-acre minimum. The subject parcel, APN 021-004-078, is a 34.23 acre parcel located at 6640 Railroad Flat Road in Mountain Ranch. The parcel is developed with a single-family residence and a former commercial cannabis cultivation site. The purpose of the rezone is for the applicant to continue to use the land for commercial cannabis cultivation under the new regulatory ordinance, as the RR zone is not included as an allowed zoning classification under the ordinance. This item was continued from the hearing on February 27th, 2020, during which the commissioners requested clarification that staff is relying on the program EIR and addendum prepared for Chapter 1795, which is the cannabis ordinance, for the proposed future cannabis use on the subject parcel. Additional documentation has since been crafted to supplement the initial study and negative declaration previously prepared for the project, as it focused on the non-cannabis cultivation related impacts associated with the proposed zoning amendment. This zoning amendment application is considered a later activity as described in section 15168 of the CEQA guidelines. The zoning amendment is within the scope of the program EIR and its addendum because the ordinance limits the total number of commercial cannabis cultivation sites within the county without identifying specific locations on which they may occur, and it specifically authorizes the potential rezoning of parcels to accommodate the relocation or reactivation of cultivation sites. The zoning amendment is intended to help the applicant and his premises qualify for a cannabis cultivation permit under Chapter 1795, and all requirements and limitations of that ordinance will apply to the applicant. As such, there are no substantial changes or new information of substantial importance that would require a subsequent EIR pursuant to Section 15162 of the CEQA guidelines. In addition, Section 15168C2 of the CEQA guidelines states that if the agency finds that pursuant to Section 15162, the agency can approve the activity as being within the scope of the project covered by the program EIR, and no new environmental document would be required. As the cannabis ordinance anticipated rezones, the negative declaration appropriately relied on the analysis in the EIR and the addendum for consideration of impacts associated with cannabis cultivation that would be permitted as a result of the zoning amendment. The supplemental cannabis-related environmental analysis provided for this hearing, which is attached as a memo to the staff report, includes a discussion which addresses compliance with the mitigation measures identified in the EIR and the addendum. The topics addressed include aesthetics, air quality, biological resources, cultural resources, geology and soils, greenhouse gas emissions, hydrology and water quality, and noise in transportation. During the previous hearing, the Commission expressed concern that the negative declaration included the term agricultural operation, which was used as it was necessary for staff to include a review of all the potential future agricultural uses that would be permitted in the RA zone. I wanted to clarify that although the proposed RA zoning will permit various agricultural activities to be conducted on the subject property, which are not currently permitted in the RR zone, commercial cultivation of cannabis, as stated in Section 1795030D, is not defined as an agricultural operation. There was also some discussion during the hearing regarding specific cannabis-related environmental impacts, including odors, wildlife movement restrictions due to fencing, groundwater use, and noise from the proposed future cannabis use. So I wanted to touch on those specific topics and discuss the mitigation measures and code sections which address those impacts. The potential for a cannabis cultivation site to create objectionable odors is discussed in the EIR and the addendum. While the mitigations identified in the EIR and addendum would reduce some outdoor cultivation and processing odors by increasing the distance between potential sources and receptors, it would remain significant and unavoidable. However, the subject parcel is located adjacent to parcels less than 20 acres in size that are zoned RR, and therefore the applicant will be required to comply with a special setback as stated in section 1795090I2 of the Cannabis Ordinance, which requires that all cultivation sites located on A1, AP, GF, and RA zoned land have a setback to the cultivation site of 150 feet for parcels adjacent to parcels of less than 20 acres zoned RR. There are no residences located on the adjacent parcels zoned RR. The nearest residence is approximately 400 feet to the east on the adjacent parcel, which is 10 acres in size and zone unclassified. In addition, there were no comments received from the adjacent landowners during the initial routing in opposition of the proposed zoning amendment. Although implementation of the cannabis ordinance would require the provision of fencing for security purposes, which could restrict wildlife movement in the area, the fencing at the subject parcel was previously constructed as required under the 2016 urgency ordinance. The EIR and addendum determined that impacts to wildlife corridors and wildlife movement from placement of fencing around cultivation sites were less than significant, with implementation of mitigation measure 3.3-1. This mitigation measure requires applicants to enroll in waste discharge requirements with the State Water Resources Control Board under the 2019 General Order, which ensures compliance with standards for protection of wildlife and other biological resources. Fencing at the subject parcel is restricted to the cultivation area, which the applicant has stated will remain as a half-acre site. However, under the cannabis ordinance, the applicant has the ability to grow up to an acre. As the subject parcel is 34 acres in size, with topography sloping north towards Jesus Maria Creek, there is sufficient area outside of the potential 1 acre of cultivation to allow for wildlife movement. Under 1795, each permittee relying on groundwater must conduct well production tests and annual monitoring to ensure that well pumping does not decrease groundwater supply. And as discussed previously, there is a well being used on this parcel. Mitigation measure 3.5-3 of the EIR and addendum requires applicants with a permitted well water supply source to prepare and implement a well monitoring program. The cannabis ordinance requires that the applicant submit an annual well report estimating the average daily water use from July through September and results from a pumping test conducted in September for the first 5 years after receiving the initial permit. While the provisions of the cannabis ordinance approved by the board differed from the mitigation measures in the EIR and addendum, the board found that those provisions provided comparable mitigation and the impact was mitigated to a less than significant level. And finally, with regards to noise, the negative declaration for the zoning amendment stated that sound from any agricultural operation is subject to Chapter 14.02 of the County Code, being exempt from the county's noise ordinance. The statement was an analysis of the potential additional agricultural operations that are permitted in the RA zone and not the RR zone. As cannabis cultivation is not defined as an agricultural operation, as such it would be subject to the county's noise ordinance. The cannabis ordinance requires separation from sensitive uses, prohibits the use of generators except in an emergency, and prohibits the delivery of water by a truck. Other than impacts associated with odors and traffic, all impacts analyzed in the EIR and addendum were found to be less than significant. Pursuant to CEQA, the county made findings of overriding consideration when the cannabis ordinance was adopted, finding that those impacts would be acceptable in light of the benefits of the regulatory ordinance. So in conclusion, the proposal is to rezone from RR20 to RA20 for the purpose of reactivating a prior cannabis cultivation operation that was permitted under the provisions of the urgency ordinance in effect from 2016 to 2018. The RA zone is consistent with the Working Lands General Plan land use designation, and the rezone will not conflict with future surrounding zoning classifications as discussed in the staff report. The parcel is 32 acres in size, which meets the minimum parcel size requirement of 5 acres in the RA zone. A zoning amendment to allow the applicant the possibility of reactivating the previous commercial cannabis cultivation site is consistent with Chapter 1795 and consistent with the current general plan, which encourages larger parcels to have agricultural uses, allowing more opportunity to use and maintain the land. The negative declaration appropriately relied on the analysis in the EIR and addendum for the cannabis ordinance for consideration of impacts associated with cannabis cultivation that would be permitted as a result of this zoning amendment. The proposed project is within the scope of the EIR and addendum in conjunction with an amendment of Chapter 1795 of the County Code, allowing commercial cannabis cultivation under a regulatory permit scheme and expressly allowing the rezoning of property to become eligible for a permit so long as the county does not increase the number of permits issued by doing so. Approval of this zoning amendment will not increase the total number of permits issued under the ordinance. However, I wanted to add that the applicant does have the ability to relocate and establish a new cultivation site, but has chosen to reactivate the previous site at the subject parcel, therefore substantially lessening impacts. Approval of this zoning amendment does not guarantee that the applicant will qualify for a commercial cannabis cultivation permit, and he would still be subject to all the regulations and restrictions imposed by state and local cannabis cultivation laws, as well as any site-specific conditions imposed by the state on his cannabis cultivation license. As discussed in the staff report, the proposed zoning amendment is consistent with the county's existing requirements and ordinances governing zoning amendments, and all required findings for the zoning amendment can be made. Thank you. And I have spoken to the applicant previously. He is listening in. If you have any questions for me or for him, please let me know.
Are there any questions from the commissioners for Madeline?
Yes. If the zoning is changed from RR to RA, and if the applicant meets the requirements for a permit under the cannabis ordinance, then granting the permit to cultivate is a ministerial act, correct?
It is.
And so there will be no discretion left in the county. It must grant the permit under those circumstances, right?
Yes.
Okay. But this is a request for a zoning amendment. So the county does have discretion whether to grant it. Is that correct?
Do you want to talk on that a little bit?
Yes.
All right. So
So the act of rezoning is a legislative act which is discretionary.
So I want to get into some of the specifics about the impacts of this request. And start with air quality and odors. The location of this cultivation that would be in place, but is not now, appears to be in the southeast corner of the parcel, looking at figure 2 of the staff report. And immediately adjoining this site to the south and southeast are 2 RR zone parcels. Have I got that right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And those parcels are roughly 5 acres apiece?
That's my recollection, yes.
And then to the east, there's 2 other parcels currently zoned U, but they'll be rezoned to RR under the current plans. Is that right?
Most likely, yes.
And how large are those parcels? 5 acres?
The parcels to the east are between 5 and 10 acres in size.
Okay. Now, looking at the March 2nd supplemental staff report, it says northwesterly and northeasterly winds converge in this area and become northerly winds, according to a model. Now, is that a north wind blowing from north to south?
Yes,
Okay. So that wind will be blowing from the grow site that's near the southeast corner of the parcel towards at least one of the rural residential parcels. Is that right?
yes, that would be with the prevailing winds. That would
And
be
so the setback would be 150 feet, which is 50 yards, half the distance of a football field. So is it fair to say that this order would be expected to be substantial and during the months when the crop is maturing?
From the perspective of CEQA, a substantial impact from odors would be impacting a substantial number of people. So the fact that it may impact one property owner is not considered a significant impact under CEQA. It would certainly be considered a potential impact to that individual property owner.
Okay, but to the extent that this commission has the discretion whether to recommend approval of this zoning request, and the county has discretion to deny it. And so, isn't it fair to say that this commission and the county, exercising that discretion, can consider the impact on the neighboring parcels?
Certainly it could.
Okay. I'm not suggesting in this line that a subsequent EIR needs to be prepared. I happen to think one does, but that's not the point of my question. My question has to do with the discretion that this commission has as to its recommendation and that the county has as to its action. And then under the cannabis ordinance, an outdoor grow can now have a maximum of 1 acre, as opposed to the 22,000 square feet that was analyzed in the draft, well, in the EIR, right?
That's correct.
And the EIR points out that generally the larger the size of the canopy area, the greater the potential of odor to be evident to off-site receptors. So if we have a significant and unavoidable impact with a grow of a half an acre, doesn't it follow that it's going to be even greater with the potential to have a grow that's double that size?
That potential is there, yes.
And the addendum points out that the number of potential cultivation sites was reduced from 750 down to 190 to 200. And with that, and with the increase in the minimum parcel size, and by eliminating cultivation in the RR zone, the impact would be further reduced. If you compare the ordinance analyzed in the EIR to the current one, but the impact is still considered significant. But here, isn't it correct that the parcel size is not particularly relevant because the grow is in one corner of the parcel right next to some RR parcels? Would that be right?
That would be correct, yes.
And the proposal here is to avoid the RR zone limitation. That's what we're here for. Okay. Now, on the hydrology part of things, I think the applicant said that an existing well wasn't adequate and they drilled a new one. Is that right?
That's my recollection, yes.
Where is that well located?
The original well or the new one?
the one he's going to use to supply his cultivation site with water?
I'm assuming that it is adjacent to the cultivation site, but I
Okay.
don't have it mapped.
Okay, under that assumption, so we're looking at, under the EIR, 390,000 gallons of water for a half an acre, and if he doubles it, it's 780,000 gallons per year, right? And do we know the production of this well in gallons per minute?
I believe the applicant told me it was, I want to say somewhere in the order of 20 gallons a minute?
How much?
20 gallons a minute?
Okay. Now, you spoke of the protections in the ordinance requiring well monitoring and testing. And point one is the EIR required monitoring of neighboring wells that might be affected. That's no longer the case, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And instead of the 3 pumping tests per year that was called for by the EIR, now there's 1 per year in September, right?
Yes.
Okay. And the EIR standard of having no continuous decline of water over 5 years has been changed to having an adequate supply of water, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you have an initial test, and then you have subsequent annual tests. And if the initial test shows an adequate supply of water, if the well recovers after 24 hours to within 90% of its static water level measured prior to the test, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's the initial test under 17.95070I. Then in September, for the next 5 years, the permittee must repeat the well testing procedure described in 17.95070I, which means the well has to recover to within 90% of the static water level measured prior to the test. Now, this is the annual test. Now, prior to the test would seem to mean prior to the test being conducted at that time. Is that correct?
That would be a logical assumption of how that test is going to be run. I don't know the specifics of that. That is something that's handled by the Environmental Management Agency, Environmental Health Department. But I assume that would make sense that the drawdown is done so that it's accurately reflecting the use of the water as it relates to the cultivation.
Okay. If that's correct, and I think that is the natural reading of it, otherwise it said it would have referred to the static water level prior to the initial test, but it didn't say that. If that's correct, then the well on the initial test would have an adequate supply of water if it recovered to 91% of the static water level measured prior to that test. The next year, starting at that same level to which the well recovered, there would be considered to be an adequate water supply with recovery of 91% to that level, right?
I don't know enough about hydrology and well testing to know if that is accurate or not. I think there's probably from simply a discussion of the words in the ordinance that could be construed that way. I would suspect that, as the use of the water, ends after the cultivation season, that there would be some additional replenishing of the groundwater. But again, that's something that the testing is supposed to look at to determine whether or not there is an acceptable continual use of that water. understand the point that you're getting at, that it could gradually diminish by 10% over time. Whether or not we are, or you're satisfied with the mitigation that was included in the EIR that was adopted by the Board of Supervisors and certified, that's not really the point here today. We're not re-debating the adequacy of the EIR for the ordinance. As you discussed earlier, this is a discretionary action to zone the property. The EIR analyzed that and was found by the Board of Supervisors to adequately mitigate the impact of water drawdown for cultivation.
Well, I'm not suggesting that the standard ought to be changed. I'm trying to figure out how it works. And under the ordinance, it appears to me that you would still be considered to have an adequate supply of water if the well declined over 5 years almost 50%. And since we do have discretion here, and since we have a well that is, we assume to be very close to the neighboring RR parcels, all we know in terms of protection is that this could happen, and those neighboring wells could drop if they're connected by almost half over 5 years, and nobody could do anything to stop it, because the granting of the cannabis permit would be ministerial at that point, and his well would have been complying with the ordinance well monitoring and testing requirements. And so that's just the situation that we have. And when we're looking at exercising our discretion, I think we have to take that into account. Now, the adjoining parcels would have to rely on well water, wouldn't they? Because there's no public water supply there?
That's correct.
Okay. That's the questions I have at this time.
Are there further questions for Madeline before we give the applicant an opportunity to call in? No.
Not from ladders.
Thank you, Tim. If the applicant is listening, which I believe you are, this would be a good time for you to give us a call and add any comments you may have. In the meantime, I don't believe there was any written public comments received. No? Thank you. We'll give him a minute.
Yes, good morning. Is this Mr. Ducharme?
It is.
Great. You are speaking live, so go ahead and continue on with your presentation.
Perfect. I just want to call in and address, first off, thank you for taking the time as well. I know everybody's probably a little hectic with all the coronavirus stuff, so I appreciate y'all taking the time to address this today. The couple points that I just wanted to address were ones that were brought up just a moment ago regarding water as well as odor. The odor situation, the adjacent lot that was being pointed out is actually the owner of that lot I'm currently housing at my house. I have a very good relationship with him, and he's been struggling like a lot of people in this county. So we have assisted him with providing the house, as I have not been there over the last 2 years trying to maintain my income. As such, I'm 100% confident that odor is not going to be an issue, as the gentleman is going to be helping me out with my project at my house there. I'm going to be trying to help him with employment, as, again, I mentioned, he's having difficulties like a lot of people in there trying to maintain a steady income living out there. So that being said, the water level as well as the odor bothering an adjacent lot, that adjacent lot is owned by someone that's currently living at my house, and that's not going to be an issue towards them, nor would water, as I'm currently providing him his water living at my house, and there is no well in the adjacent lot because there is no house in the adjacent lot that he lives in. I only bring these things up because the nuances of the EIR that are going to be a nuisance to my neighbors, really, those neighbors I know and have good relations with, provide employment with, and provide housing with. So I don't see how they're, I won't be affecting them as they are planning on building on that lot down the line, and they are very well aware of the farm that was previously there, as well as our intentions to currently farm with no objections or comment to it up to this point. So it's kind of a new point, but I did want to bring that up, that we are in very close relations with the adjacent lot that were being brought up there as issues potentially down the line. Those will not be an issue, and I wish I'd known ahead of time, because I would have had him come in as a witness to this, so that he could also attest that odor and water are not concerns of his, and that we actually are very close and working hand in hand to make sure that we protect that whole area, his lot, our lot, and try to have as little impact as possible on all of it. But yeah, that's the main points I could see there. Outside of that, that's all from me. I appreciate it.
Does any
Unless
member...
anybody has any questions for me as well.
Unfortunately, the way this is set up, it was difficult for me to hear, but I understand there's no houses adjacent. The two are our parcels that are directly south, but there's...
And I apologize if you're asking me a question I can't hear, because I have to turn the volume down on the video conference as I'm speaking to you guys. So I don't know what you're saying back to me here, if anybody's speaking to me.
I think that you're correct. The parcels adjacent are empty right now after the fire, and the owner of the parcel most affected by this is actually living in a house on his property, on the applicant's
It's in
property.
my house, yes, ma'am.
Okay. Of course, the fact there's nobody there now doesn't mean that somebody might not want to build there later. No, I don't have any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Descharme. We're going to go ahead and open up an opportunity for public comment on this item. So is there any member of the public who would like to comment? You can call 209-754-2877.
Thank you.
We will wait about 5 minutes, which would be, 9:57? So please call in before then if you'd like to speak to this item.
Thank you for calling in your public comment to the Planning Commission. You will be giving a live comment, so keep in mind that there is a delay in the video. You will have 5 minutes to give your comment. You will receive a warning when you have 30 seconds remaining, and when your time is over, this call will end. Please be sure to turn off the volume of the meeting broadcast before you speak. If you would like to give your name, please do so and then begin your comments.
Receive a warning when you have 30 seconds remaining, and when your time is over, this call will end. Please be sure to turn off the volume of the meeting broadcast before you speak. If you would like to give your name, please do so and then begin your comment. Receive a warning when you have 30 seconds remaining, and when your time is over, this call will end. Please be sure to turn off the volume of the meeting broadcast
If someone is on the line and wishes to comment, please begin.
Yes, this is Vicki Reinke, and I just want to say I'm very fortunate to be able to watch the meeting because I have access to the internet. Anyway, I wanted to make this and emphasize again what Commissioner Wooster has talked about. And, you know, I have followed this topic since the very beginning, and one of the things that have been discussed in the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors all along as they were planning out bringing back the cultivation was that RR zones would not be included. It was very clear. And yes, there's a provision that you can change those zoning if it is appropriate. And looking at the map, you can see that there are many 5-acre RRs around that piece of property, which may not be developed yet, but when they do, it'll be a huge issue for those people having a marijuana grow right next to them. This is going to set precedent, and I think you should think very seriously about rezoning an RR. So that was just kind of my comment to remind you all that that was a very big topic and a very big promise to the people of Calaveras County that marijuana would not be grown on RR properties. So I hope that you listen to your commissioner and reconsider whether you should be rezoning this property. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this item? Please call 209-754-2877. And we will wait another minute to hear. Seeing no additional phone calls, we are going to close the public comment portion of this hearing at this time and bring it back to the commission for further comments. Who would like to get started?
Well, how about me? This is Vladish.
That's great, Tim. Get started.
Okay. This is a quasi-legislative matter concerning a topic that has recently been legislated upon by the Board of Supervisors. That legislation by the Board of Supervisors is the current county law on the subject to review by the courts. Application to the current matter of the recent Board of Supervisors legislation and the EIR approval by the board, together with the acceptance of the new initial study and negative declaration regarding non-cannabis considerations, clearly would result in the granting of the rezoning application. In the exercise of its discretionary quasi-legislative powers, the Planning Commission could re-examine the underlying issues and recommend legislative changes to the recent Board of Supervisors legislation and findings and EIR findings. Such re-examination will result in significant delays in getting this particular matter resolved. Such re-examination is not necessary, I believe, strong considerations of fairness to the individual. The applicant before us has followed the rules and is relying upon current, recently enacted county laws, and further delays would result in substantial and undeserved cost to him. Under these circumstances, I support granting the application before us based upon the revised materials presented by the planning director and staff. That's my comment.
Thank you. Is there anyone else before I say my piece?
Yeah, just let me comment. I know he just said that, talked about fairness. I lean on the side of the fairness of the people that own the properties around it. That was the reason why there was such a battle over not allowing cannabis cultivation in an RR zone. And again, a lot of properties around here are going to be affected. Sadly, yeah, we can't do anything about the way they decided to change, like the well testing. I know we can't do anything about it, but it's absolutely ridiculous that there's no requirement that nearby wells be tested, because once you draw down the water supply, once the aquifer is dried up, everybody's property value goes to nothing. Nobody wants to buy a piece of property where you have no water. But unfortunately, I worked in doing well testing and that sort of thing, and what they finally came up with is highly, highly inadequate. And I don't know how that was ever allowed, but I'm gonna vote on the side of fairness for the properties surrounding this that are going to be affected. Their property values are going to be affected, and that's not fair to the property owners, because at some point they're going to want to develop that. So my vote is going to be no on this.
Commissioner Henderson?
I positively concur with Mr. Lash's comments. What we're looking at is Mr. Duchesne brought forth what he was proposing to do with property. That was left out of the picture, was never mentioned. I don't think this would be such a huge issue. We just look at it, make sure it was concurrent with the general plan, grant it, and move on. So my feeling is that the applicant has been through the process, done it legally and properly. I don't see that we should postpone and create more hardship, financial hardship on the applicant.
Thank you. I have a question for the planning director. I understand that the Board of Supervisors is looking at amendments to the cultivation ordinance. Are they also looking at the well testing requirements?
There is a provision, so yes, the board had a study session on Tuesday that looked at some amendments to Chapter 1795. One of the directives was to modify the test requirements primarily because of the time frame necessary to do it. The testing window will be between, I believe it's now July through September or through October, primarily because there aren't enough well drillers and testers available to do, upwards of 100 tests during a 1-month period. And so that window has been opened broader or more broadly to accommodate the required testing. But that's the only change that I'm aware of. The board directed staff to
If
work
in
on.
the future it's determined that the well testing procedures are inadequate and the ordinance is modified again, would all of the current cannabis cultivation licensees be subject to those new requirements since they're having to renew each year?
I'm not sure of the answer to that. One argument could be that they are established under the current rules and would be able to allow them under those same rules. However, on something like that, I think that new testing regimens would probably apply. I would need to discuss that with council to make sure. I don't know clearly what the case is on that.
I was thinking also if it was impacting neighbors sufficiently that they were unable to live on their property or get adequate water, not speaking to this particular applicant's issue. But just in general, it seems like the county would have the authority to make changes.
Again, I'm not sure the answer to that question.
Okay.
It's really not something that I'm familiar with. That well testing, well permitting requirements are handled by the Environmental Management Agency and not the Planning Department. So I don't know if the county has the ability to limit someone's use of water if it is adversely affecting an adjacent property. If it weren't cannabis that was planted, there would be no restriction on the amount of water that could be pumped. Now, we know this cannabis is proposed here, but in other parts of the county where almond orchards are being planted or vineyards are planted, there are no restrictions on the amount of water that could be pumped.
Thank you. I concur with Commissioners Laddish and Henderson that this project seems to be perfectly in keeping with the intent of the ordinance, and which allows the rezoning in appropriate locations of RR parcels to RA. So I am open to a motion, or is there further discussion by the commissioners?
I have things to say, but it seems to be not productive to say them. Maybe I will anyway. The ordinance itself, in 17.95.010B, says it's also the purpose and intent of this chapter to develop reasonable regulations to prevent commercial cannabis cultivation in higher density residential zones and to minimize its impact on residents. And it goes on to say, and also provide those state compliant cultivators who complied with the urgency ordinance to apply for compatible zoning designation for their parcel. Doesn't say that it should be granted, doesn't say it shouldn't be. Doesn't take a position. But it does make it clear that the intent is to protect people from impact in these residential zones. And this odor problem could and probably will be severe given the location of the grow in the corner of the parcel, the adjoining other rural residential parcels. The wind blows from the grow towards these other parcels. These other parcels are small size, so the people who own them, if they chose to build there, can't go far enough away to avoid the smell. And the size of the applicant's parcel is sort of irrelevant here because he's growing in one corner of it. So the effect of this may well be to deprive the neighboring owners of much, if not all, of the beneficial use of their property. And with respect to the wells, the neighbors have to depend on wells if they ever want to do anything. His well is located close to them. We're talking the potential for a lot of water, 390,000 gallons a year if he doesn't expand past a half an acre, 780,000 if he does expand to an acre. This ordinance does not protect against a sizable drawdown of the water levels. Once they're down, they're down. So I am not in favor of this rezoning. This is the one opportunity the county has to avoid these consequences on these neighbors. And if it's not taken, it's gone.
Would anyone else like to comment before we ask Madeline to read the recommendation for us? Commissioner Laddish?
No, I have one question as to the resolution, but that's it.
Why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Okay, it's a very minor thing. And I'm talking about the resolution with the revised finding number 1 that was submitted to us online yesterday, I believe. And I fully agree with it, and I think the approach of the resolution now is it's clear as far as how we're balancing the non-cannabis uses in our current initial statement, negative declaration, and the cannabis usages that were covered in the EIR for the entire ordinance. The only suggestion I made, and this is very minor, is on page 4, under number 4, under evidence, the last sentence, and the 32-acre parcel meets the minimum parcel size requirement of 5 acres in the RA zone district, as well as the 20-acre, and then I would cross out minimum and put in subdivision limitation requirement for the working land use designation. And I only mention that because there are clearly many working lands parcels in the general fund land use map that are under 20 acres. And I don't want anybody to get the idea that will have to be changed. It is not a size minimum, it's a limitation on what you can subdivide a working lands parcel into. So that's my only suggestion.
So technically, that's correct. I think the minimum implies that, but if the commission is more comfortable with that revision, that's fine with the planning department.
I don't feel strongly either way. I'm okay with it. Anybody else? Also, the next section just needs the number changed from 3 to 5. As long as we're nitpicking. Oh, I'm sorry. I do want to make one comment before Madeline reads the recommendation to us, is that the actual neighbors of this parcel have had an extended opportunity to comment and to object to this zone change, and they have not taken advantage of that opportunity. And while I understand our obligation to advocate for the neighbors and to look into the future to future owners of that property, we have not heard any indication of a problem with the previous grow operation that existed on that parcel. And that has weighed heavily in my inclination here. Thank you.
All right. So staff recommends that the Planning Commission sign amended resolution 2020-002, recommending the Board of Supervisors adopt the negative declaration and approve zoning amendment 2019-077 based on the findings therein.
Is there a motion?
I make a motion.
And that would be as revised with the revised finding 1 that was provided to you 2 days ago, I believe. And what was the decision on?
What was the decision on Commissioner Laddish's proposed edit to finding number 4, I believe it was?
Let's go ahead and include it.
Include that edit, okay.
Make a motion to approve zoning amendment 201907 with the...
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Laddish, aye.
All opposed?
No.
So it passes on a 3-2 vote with Commissioners Wooster and Fiorino opposed.
And this automatically goes to the Board of Supervisors, and we'll schedule that as time allows.
Thank you, everybody. Would anyone like to take a break now?
Yes, please.
Let's take a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 10:25. It's 10:25 and the Planning Commission is back in session. We will be beginning item Project 2017-122 Cannabis Retailer Ordinance. And our Planning Director will give us a presentation.
Okay, good morning. This is Peter Maurer. Tim, I hope you can hear me better. So this is an ordinance amendment to amend Chapter 1791, currently called the Medical Cannabis Dispensary Ordinance, and we're proposing to rescind this in its entirety and replace it with a new Chapter 1791 Cannabis Retailers Ordinance. The principal difference in this ordinance would be, as directed by the Board of Supervisors back in February of last year,
Excuse me, Peter, this is Tim. Should we consider the possible continuance of this as has been raised by the public before we get into the merits?
It's certainly up to the Planning Commission. I'll just go directly to that. We have had several emails, I think there were 3 or 4 in total, recommending that this item be continued to after the emergency. We also had Ms. Renke's call earlier this morning. She was one of those who emailed earlier. So I'll defer to the commission on whether or not you just want to table this for now and carry it over to a later time.
I think we should hear just a brief summary of what's to come and then have a discussion about that.
I really think we need to have a discussion because I've received no, I had to go online and get it. Yeah, I can do that. But I have very slow internet at home, so it's difficult. And then to print it, I emailed yesterday, said I didn't receive it, and I have an email back that said I was going to get a written copy this morning. I still have not gotten that. So I, as a planning commissioner, do not feel prepared to even begin discussing this. I need time. If you look at how it is on the screen when I have it on, I have to scroll up and down. I can't mark and flip and go back and forth. I need to be able to do that to really understand what I'm...
I was talking about a discussion of whether we should postpone this.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay,
We need to
yeah.
postpone for those reasons. Yeah, and I think the other thing is this is a really important subject. It's next to the whole cannabis ordinance, it's just as important. And to do it in this atmosphere, I know we're trying to let public comment and think, but it really is not adequately allowing the public. And I don't know what the urgency of this is. Those that are selling medical marijuana dispensaries are able to continue doing that until we get through this. I think that this can wait until we have some restrictions lifted on all of us and we can get back to normal business. I don't see the urgency of this, why we have to have it right now. So I would ask for this to be postponed till a later date.
Commissioner Henderson?
I tend to agree with Trent. I didn't receive a packet as well. I was able to print it off, but it was at the last minute. And I did get the emails from the members of the public requesting to have a continuance. And in all fairness, I don't see a rush to get this amendment moved forward so fast with the current state of affairs that's going on with the COVID-19 and members of the public not being able to attend. It is kind of cumbersome. So I would be in favor of a continuance.
Well, I would too. I think we've gotten 4 requests to have it continued because of the importance of it and the difficulty of dealing with it under these circumstances. I would point out that Section 17.91 needs to be reworked anyway. Quite apart from this proposed expansion, and there was a draft that the Planning Commission came up with of a rework back in September, October of 2017. And nothing happened to it. There didn't seem to be any urgency on it. But it would be helpful to me to have a copy of that draft to compare with what's been presented to us now, because I think what we're getting now was taken from the earlier one. Because I do have an earlier draft of what we did in September of 2017, but not what we sent to the board. The other thing is, it appears that the board on Tuesday has directed staff to come up with amendments to 17.95 to allow more types of cannabis activity, which in turn will probably, or at least may require amendments to the dispensary/retail ordinance, 17.91. So to me, it makes some sense to continue it, to perhaps allow that to be done at once, so we're not visiting 17.91 2 times instead of 1 time. So for all those reasons, I would be in favor of continuing it.
Commissioner Laddish?
Yes, that's why I raised it. I think the public has a valid concern that under these and I can vouch for the fact that trying to watch on a 20-second delay and listen on real time is quite something for me. I do believe that this is something that unless there is a great urgency, and perhaps in public comments we will hear public comments on the question of continuance, maybe we will hear as to why there is a great urgency. I think it should be continued. I am not optimistic that we're going to be getting back to normal operations very soon. So perhaps we should continue it to a date certain, and then if we need to continue it again. Eventually, we may need to be considering this along with the amendments coming up with 17.95. But I think for now, especially given our experimental stage in trying to conduct public meetings without the public being present, I think we should continue it. I would ask whether the members of the commission have been given the comments and questions that I had relating to the subject.
Yes.
We have, but the public doesn't have them.
No, I know, and that's something I think we need to, I suggested when I submitted these that, I submit things in a way that could be projected on the screen, so, and I know that the planning director was considering ways where my comments could be on the screen. Other people have questions that they write down, which is perfectly fine too, but my comments aren't sui generis, different than comments that would just be made directly from the podium. I am in favor of a continuance. I would open the question as whether we should do it to a date certain at this point, or leave it open.
So I had the same notes to myself when I came today. Is it appropriate to hear this with all the challenges for public input? We have changes coming to 1795 anyway. And I think the most significant issue in here that I saw was the whole distribution question and wording of that, which I think needs to get looked at to make sure we understand what we're allowing, not allowing, what the intention is there. And is this an urgent question? So I would also be in favor of delaying this. I believe that we need to allow public comment on the possibility of a delay.
That's correct.
So for those of you who are watching online or listening, you may call in now to provide your position on whether this item should be delayed or not, and then we will discuss what a reasonable schedule might be for that, given the uncertainty of our public meetings. The phone number is 209-754-2877. We will allow 5 minutes to see if we get any phone calls. Thank you. During this delay while we wait, we do know that we received a few email comments asking us to delay this item. Peter or Gina, you want to summarize what has been received?
Yes, we did receive 3 letters requesting delay. We received a letter from one of the retailers who requested modifications to the provisions regarding distribution, and another letter opposing the ordinance, objecting to the allowance of adult use cannabis sales.
Thank you.
And each of those were previously distributed to the commissioners via email.
So again, for anybody who might be watching this on a phone and having a hard time reading the phone number, the number is 209-754-2877.
While we're waiting, we did receive 2 emails during the process of this public hearing, but if you folks are considering a continuance, then you'll receive those in the follow-up packet. Unless you find it absolutely necessary for me to read them into the record today, I think it would probably be acceptable just to simply forward those on.
Does either one of them address the delay issue?
No.
Thank you. We will wait until 10:40 to see if we get any calls or additional emails.
Just for your information, this is Tim. It is now 10:40, and your announcement was just finished, so you might allow a little more time.
It's not 10:40 on our clocks yet.
That's Sheep Ranch time.
And there's a 20-second delay on the joke.
Yeah.
If the announcement just went out, probably you should just say, 5 minutes from now, which, according to our clock would be 10:44. So for the public who's calling in, if they just got the notice a moment ago, we should probably give them a little bit more time than another minute that we had previously described.
We'll allow another 2 minutes before we close the public comment section. I can hear us with a double delay. Who knew we needed entertainment for intermission? The planning commission. Yeah. Little moonwalking.
Soft shoe, dramatic reading.
Do you say?
I used to until my voice was shot, so.
Gina, are you able to check the email?
I am checking the, yeah, we seem to have a bit of a problem. Annette's forwarding them to me because I don't have access, but so far, none of the emails received are particularly pertaining to the continuance of the item, but rather they are either in favor of or in opposition to the amendments.
Thank you. So the time period for public comment has passed, and we will close the public comment period at this time and bring it back to the commission for a motion on delaying this to a future date. Should we discuss when that might be?
I think that's a good idea. I know Commissioner Laddish recommended that it be continue to a date certain with the unknown of when the shelter-in-place order and the emergency isn't, going to end. I would suggest that it be continued off calendar. We can notice it when we are prepared to have a regular meeting, which appears to be what the commission desires here, is to have a normal public attended meeting to consider this item. So I would recommend it be continued off calendar.
Thank you.
Would you recommend that we try to have this scheduled in the future so that the amendments to 17.95 could come at the same time as they affect 17.91?
We could certainly look at that. I don't know how long that may take. I know that there is a desire by the majority of the board to have this amendment before them sooner rather than later. And if we're able to conduct a public hearing before the changes to 1795 are ready to go, I don't think there would be desire of the board to further delay this item. So I can't guarantee it. We can try to make that happen if you want, but I know that there are board members that want to see this amendment move forward.
It kind of depends on how long it will take staff to come up with the other amendments to 17.95, and I don't have a feel for that.
Absolutely, I don't either. We have to, we just got the direction 2 days ago. We haven't had a chance to really sit down and noodle over how we're going to make these changes, what's the CEQA ramifications. There's a lot of consideration we need to look at with those proposed changes.
Okay.
I have a question for the planning director. If any of the existing licenses are about to expire, they could be renewed under the current ordinance while we're waiting to decide on the amended ordinance. Is that correct?
That is correct. Until this ordinance is adopted and becomes effective, the current 1791 provisions apply.
I would.
Do you happen to know when the next renewal is due?
I believe it's in August or September. I'm not certain, but my recollection is most of them come up around that time of year. We have 4 of them currently, 3 that are operating and 1 under construction, and I think most of them are all later this year.
I would imagine there is some urgency from the perspective of the operators of those 4 businesses. However, I think we've only heard from one of them, and delaying this is definitely the right thing, and I don't think we can determine when we will be able to have a public hearing that is less awkward for the participants.
Yeah, I withdraw my suggestion for a continuance to a date certain. I think we want to ask the staff to keep in mind that if we increase our abilities to conduct these meetings without the clumsiness, not by anybody, what anybody has done today, but just if it becomes more feasible, we might consider to bring this on if there is a developing need. I would also suggest that if we do continue with this, that the amendments being developed for 17.95 be kept in mind as far as exactly what would be presented in the amendments to 17.91. In other words, that this not be a static thing, that when it's presented to us in the future, that it may, well, hopefully would indicate some agreements with what I've been suggesting, but also we keep track of what else is being considered in under 17.95.
We will certainly do that.
Is there someone who would like to make a motion to delay this indefinitely until such time as we can manage a meeting?
I think it would just be to continue it off calendar.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. And I think we are looking for commissioner reports, if any.
None from me.
Does the planning director have anything to report?
Just a couple of quick items. We've already discussed the fact that the board has directed us to make changes. There are some more or less cleanup issues associated with the 1795 ordinance that will be moving forward fairly rapidly. The board also directed us to consider where manufacturing, distribution, and testing might be allowed. That's going to take more time, and that'll be taken up as a separate ordinance as directed by the board. I wanted to give you a little update on general plan implementation. I put out a request for proposals for a consultant to assist us with a comprehensive rewrite of the zoning code. Unfortunately, last Friday when the time period closed, we had no proposals. So I'm going to go out and redo that, try to figure out a better way to reach those consultants that might be interested in doing so. Don't know the reason why we didn't get any proposals. It could be a variety of reasons, but hopefully we'll get someone on board. So that's going to delay that a little bit. I am expecting a proposal on a greenhouse gas inventory, which would be the first step on one of those, the measures associated with greenhouse gases. And we can get started on that. In the meantime, we're working on the zoning conformity map, which would bring zoning into compliance with the land use designations if there are any inconsistencies. Also to remove the unclassified and highway service zones, which are identified as interim zones and are long overdue for changes. Hoping to get that to you within a couple of months. Again, we'll see how, that's something that clearly we'll need to have maps on the wall and the ability to zoom in on different things, so we will not hold that until we get back to some kind of normal hearing procedure. I know that the CAO and IT are working on a more effective public meeting process if this COVID-19 emergency declaration continues for for a greater length of time, and we'll just keep you posted on that. We will not have a meeting on April 9th, I believe. We just didn't have anything scheduled, and it sort of worked out that there was nothing pressing. I'm not sure about the second meeting of April. At this point, I am suggesting unless there's something that's really critical, time-sensitive, that needs to be done, we'll cancel that meeting as well. But I'll let you know as we get closer to that and find out more about where we're at with this whole emergency situation. That's all I have.
Thank you. So I want to thank the members of the public who did participate by email or by phoning in, and the staff and planning director and all the commissioners who put up with this quite clumsy, as Tim said, and a little bit cumbersome process. And this meeting is adjourned. Stay safe, stay well.
Wash your hands.
Wash